I'm Sam Slater from FundCalibre, and today I've been joined by Stephanie Butcher, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Invesco. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi there.
So, first of all, perhaps we could start with, what is the role of a Chief Investment Officer?
Yes, it's a very good question. I remember when I first got the role, a very senior and experienced client said to me, well, what sort of CIO are you going to be? Are you going to be an investment CIO or a business CIO? And it was a really good question, because the reality is the job is a mixture of the two. I think, for me, I do still run money. I'm still intimately involved with the clients and portfolios. And so that part of the job is key. But I think it makes the sort of part of the role of, asking the right questions of fund managers, the oversight role, if you're involved in markets day to day still, I think, that becomes, easier. The investment meetings, thinking about the right process to get the best out of the teams, structure of the team, product and so on. That's all linked. And then on the business side, I think it's really thinking about how do we, within the investment centre, link with the other parts of the business. So whether that's other divisions such as distribution, marketing, ops, etc., but also being part of a global business, we're part of a $1.4 trillion asset manager is, how do we get the best of that platform for all of our clients, and how do we work with those different parts of the business?
And when you're looking at sort of the managing of the team side of things, I always get the impression that sort of fixed income managers are always glass half empty and equity managers glass half full. Are there those kinds of personality differences between the asset classes, or is it very much managing each individual? How do you go about it?
Yeah, that's quite amusing sort of linkage. And I mean, there's an element of that perhaps, although, in every team you have a range. I mean, I think the truth is that, in every team you've got very different characters, and it is always thinking about how do you get the best out of all of them, both within the team environment. So naturally you're going to have some big characters, naturally you're going to have some introverts, and really making sure that balance is right, both in terms of the hiring process, so making sure that we've got that diversity of thought, which is very important. But also, I think, what's been interesting about the sort of experiment we've all been forced into in lockdown is online is it's really interesting seeing how different characters, react to that. And we found that some of the people who in a physical meeting environment perhaps struggle have really kind of sort of broadened out, and their voices have been louder in that environment. So I think it is just really trying to think out what are the processes and the formats that suit the individual so that you get the best out of them.
And do you think that's some of those things you'll keep on after the pandemic when we're all back at work?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely something we're sort of talking about and sort of working with all the desk heads, sort of thinking about. I think like most, we're sort of thinking about sort of a hybrid environment. But I think there are certain meetings, and we haven't sort of, fully decided, but I think there will be certain meetings that we will keep entirely online for exactly that reason, that, that confidence level of, having younger or more junior, members of staff who really have got something to add, but who perhaps find those very big physical meetings quite intimidating. And I think that's something that it's definitely a sort of a positive learning from what we've been through.
And as a woman in what's still very much a man's world, you'll be aware of the gender issues, but how do you and Invesco go about thinking about diversity and inclusivity when you're constructing the investment team and thinking about what that team will look like in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a crucial question, and I've been involved with the Women's Network at work, and also sort of involved with other areas of our sort of diversity and inclusion, sort of social mobility, which I feel strongly about, and we've got really active work streams in a number of areas. I think the truth is, none of these things you can turn overnight. The reality is that at senior levels, the pool isn't as broad as you'd like it to be. So I think a lot is about the pipeline. A lot is about, that sort of granular work of going into schools, into universities, explaining what the business is, what the different types of roles are, and really doing an educational element. I think, then when you're sort of, if you've got people interested, is then that whole interview process is how do you make that as broad as possible? So we've done a lot of work thinking about what sort of questions you ask, how you do it, how you look, how you move away from sort of the more traditional CV type applicant. Thinking of, really encouraging teams to think about, well, what are the pieces where you can actually train people into the role as opposed to needing to have it in place, right from the word go. Thinking about who's doing the interviewing, making sure it isn't just sort of, quite sort of mono in terms of character. And then I think, for me, I think one of the most powerful methods is using mentoring when people are in the organization. And we have a very active mentoring process, and I've done the, sort of number of years of it. And for me, I think that's a hugely powerful way of, recognizing that people have got different, sort of senses in terms of their own abilities, and encouraging them to go for things and push themselves in a way that perhaps they don't naturally feel they could for whatever reason.
You've also done some work on taking away unconscious bias. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we've done lots of areas of this, and I think the encouraging thing is that the team leaders are really, really open to this. So they want to have as broad a slate of people to look at as possible. And I think, a lot of the time it is just sort of pointing out to people, have you thought about, how you relate with people, even sort of job specs. How do you write a job spec that actually doesn't in its first place put people off? And I, sort of, you look at some of the specs that were in place, years back, and it's like, well, no wonder you didn't have a breadth of applicant. And we've made huge moves on that. And when you look at some of the sort of internship programs we have and the breadth of applicants we now have, I mean, we've made major moves, and I think that's all to the good.
And what about sort of thinking about the pipeline for the next generation? Are you doing any work with schools or colleges or anything like that to encourage people into? I mean, I fell into the finance industry through languages of all things. I had no idea it even existed. So do kids today, do university, anyone there today, do they know that this industry exists in the first place?
Yeah, well, I'm like you. I fell into it as well. I'm a historian by training, so I had no idea. I mean, there was no grand plan there at all. But I think you're right. This is what I meant. This granular work of physically going into schools, and I've done that, and colleagues have done that, and again in universities, and that's been a really good sort of rich seam of just opening people's minds up, not only to what the industry is like, but also the breadth of roles within it, because it's not just about, being a fund manager or an analyst. There's the whole marketing side, there's sales, there's ops, there's the finance. It's a really broad industry to that extent. And I think, when we've gone in, the reactions have been very positive, and I know other firms do it too. I think it is, as I say, there's no magic wand here. It is that really granular element of just doing the legwork of going in and educating people. It doesn't help that, for historical reasons, whether it's, films or the media or whatever, and, some of the worst stories, the industry reputation at times isn't brilliant. And I think it's really thinking about, really dismissing some of those myths and just educating people on the reality of the hard work but fantastic job that this is, and getting people excited by it.
We need the Wolf of Wall Street going into universities and telling them the good side.
Well, that's it. Yes, it's not helpful. Hugely entertaining, but I always say to people, if you walk into an investment floor, it's more like a library than it is, that sort of trading floor, and the very different personalities. Again, the sort of image of our industry, big extrovert characters. We've got lots of introverts, very analytical and so on. There's room for everyone, but yeah, there's a lot of myth busting to be done.
And just thinking a little bit about a few of the new phenomenons that we've seen over the last couple of years, with sort of the rise of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and Robinhood traders more recently. How, as professional investors, do you deal with things like that can appear suddenly and then sort of change the way the market's working, either temporarily or long term? What do you do?
I mean, I think the first thing really is to educate yourselves. I think what you don't want to do is just ignore it and sort of, put it aside as some sort of fad or phenomenon. And I think, it is really, really fascinating, because I think, maybe it's telling you a lot about policy changes. I think liquidity is a big part of it. So understanding that is crucial. And I think, certainly for Bitcoin and for the whole sort of digital currency side of things and blockchain and so on. It's really important that we understand it. Even if it isn't the day-to-day investment for us as long-term active equity and fixed income multi-asset players at the moment, but on the multi-asset who's to say. But I think you need to understand it, and so we make sure that we have people come in and talk to the fund managers, both from externally and also people on the ETF side have worked on some of these areas as well, and just educating the fund managers so that they understand what these are, and rather than just dismissing it. And I think even with things like Robinhood, which was very retail driven, obviously almost by definition, they're big players in the markets. You can't ignore them. And even for us as long-term fund managers, you need to get a sense of how those flows may be influencing either directly your holdings or indirectly. And that's been, the traders have been super helpful to the fund managers on understanding, the dynamics of that. So yeah, it's really important not to ignore it.
Well, that was a really interesting, different take on sort of, we generally interview fund managers, so it's interesting to hear from a CIO. Thank you very much, Stephanie.
It's a pleasure.
And if you'd like to find out more about Invesco's elite rated funds, please visit FundCalibre.com.